So now we have the rules for the Admech for Engine War. Let's see some of the scariest things that they can put on the table with the combos in this book. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. So Engine War is out and Admech have received a significant power boost. As well as these 3 new units, I think that actually the biggest boosts to the army are actually in the Holy Order Warlord traits, some of the stratagems, and Mars' own unique custom canticle of the Omnissiah. With that in mind, I thought I'd talk about the very strongest things that I think that the Admech now have to offer, and we're going to look at 3 main areas: a Mars-related shooting castle, a pretty horrendous Cataphron Servitor Death Star, then I talk about a bunch of minor tricks that you could include as incidental threats in your army, and make life difficult for your opponent in a number of different ways. So first I thought I'd mention a couple of issues that I'm not sure if they might get FAQ'd for the book. First of all, they seem to make quite a big deal out of these Holy Order Warlord traits, making it out to be like some sort of it was a big decision between choosing one or the other. As far as I can tell, rules as written though, as you can buy an extra Warlord traits with the stratagem now, I don't see any reason why you couldn't have all of these functioning in your army at the same time. At only 1 command point each, plus the one that you get just for having your Warlord on the table normally, they seem really powerful to me. And I believe that rules as written, there's nothing to stop you just picking up all 4 of them and using 4 insanely powerful aura buffs that can be flexed turn on turn as well, so you can just access an insane amount of stacking buffs on the same units. I'm not 100% sure whether this is intentional. If there's any arguments rules as written, please let me know down in the comments. I'd really like to hear them. The other thing that I'm pretty certain is a mistake is the Heavy Phosphor Blaster going to 0 points in the book. I don't know if they got it mixed up with the Phosphor Carbine that the Cerberus Riders can use, but basically it used to be 15 points and now it appears to be 0 points. Until FAQ'd, it's very much rules as written that this will be the case, and I believe it means rules as written these Castellan robots are now ridiculously cheap, 30 points cheaper than they would have been, and it also means out of the various Archaeopters, the Stratoraptor is incredibly undercosted as well, being only 114 points for Twin Coglis Las Cannon, 2 Heavy Phosphor Blasters and 2 Heavy Stubbers. With its pretty reasonable defensive stat line, it would pretty much make the Iron Strider Ballistare entirely obsolete. It's only 34 points above that, gets a better defensive profile and all those extra guns as well as the Twin Cognis Las Cannon. So personally I wouldn't read too much into this. I strongly suspect that this will get put back as an FAQ at the first opportunity. So with those 2 bits out of the way, let's get into a Mars shooting castle and what sort of scary stuff it can do now. This is basically a set of stacking shooting buffs that can apply to pretty much any units in the Admech army, but it's particularly good with things like Scorpius tanks, Castellan robots, Honor Jejune crawlers, Iron Strider Ballistari, and Cataphrons destroyers. First of all, you take Call. He gives you those very nice full rerolls to hits, including rerolling if the hit is a miss because of modifiers, and he also allows some extreme canticle manipulation, meaning Mars should be pretty much in the canticle that they want to be the vast majority of the time. You can then start in the Mars Canticle for +1 strength to all heavy weapons, which is just an insane buff in itself. The Ferromite Cannon on the Scorpius can go to strength 9, Heavy Phosphor Blasters become strength 7, or Overcharged Plasma can become strength 9 as well. You then have a very good opportunity for being able to use that Canticle over and over again, because you get 2 rolls for Mars, and Core gets to manipulate one of the rolls, giving you a very good chance of using this all game long. Next up we stack it with another insane shooting buff, which is the Magos Holy Order Warlord trait. This gets exploding 6s, so within 6 inches of him, any 6 to hit automatically counts as scoring an additional hit on the target. This stacks beautifully with Core's rerolls, which means that you'll be getting more hits and more 6s in general, and basically Core plus this trait alone is a plus 66% buff to any shooting that's a Ballistic Skill 3+. Basically if you park any shooting unit in the Admech army next to these 2, it's like having an extra 2/3 of that unit's guns for absolute free, aside from the cost of the characters. Next we can also combine that with the Logos Holy Order Warlord trait. This one's another buff to 6s to hit, and it makes the AP of the guns -1 better. This one's nowhere near as strong, but as you're already applying it to some extremely buffed firepower, there's no real reason not to include it for another command point. This one's great on anything with low AP, stuff like Cognis autocannons or Heavy Phosphor Blasters are a pretty reasonable shout. It just makes the firepower that little bit nastier. And then on top of this you can have both of those Warlord trait bearers for the Magus and Logos traits, both be Tech Priest Manipuluses. One of them can give everyone the +6 inches extra range to shooting buff, getting you to be a very helpful 42 inches on a lot of our regular 36 inch firepower, and the other one can have +1 to their movement, making the entire castle just that bit more manoeuvrable. It's just an insane amount of firepower stacking buffs, and what's more, it's even really quite cheap to pull off. The characters are just 320 points, and the only other investment is 1 extra command point to buy in that second Warlord trait. This is something that Admech players could really easily add to the centre of their gun line and just fill out some HQ choices, without barely sacrificing anything else in their army. As we already mentioned, a flat 66% buff to any shooting is great, and then you also stack that on top with things like +1 strength to heavy weapons, and the extra AP -1 on 6s, and the range as well, all of which are incredibly helpful to have in a shooting castle. Just as an example, if we took the Scorpius tank, which I have misspelt with a C there, sorry, and took it with a Ferromite cannon and its missiles, and fired as an enemy Lehman Russ tank, on average the tank would do around about 3.5 wounds to said Lehman Russ, all guns considered. If that same Scorpius tank happens to be in this little bubble of absolute murder, then that very same Scorpius tank will do a massive 8 or 9 wounds to the same Lehman Russ, so it's actually over double the firepower that it would get under normal circumstances. It's just ridiculously scary stuff, and you can basically apply all these same buffs to your favourite Admech fire support, whether that's Castellan robots, Onager Dune crawlers, Iron Striders, or Cataphron breaches or destroyers. Naturally some of them are a little bit better with the synergies, such as the +1 strength, but frankly pretty much everything will be good with it. And of course, as your Mars, you always have the option to use Wrath of Mars as well on a big unit to generate some extra mortal wounds, and that'll have a lot more chance of getting more bang for the buck out of the stratagem due to all of the extra hits that you're getting between Core and the Majos trait. Genuinely, with these buffs combined, I think that Admech could have some of the scariest shooting in the whole game. So let's talk about Cataphron servitors now. These are already one of the stronger units in the Admech Codex, and in more competitive lists they were taken quite a bit. Some of my favourite variants are either the Heavy Arc Rifle or the Plasma Cavalry, depending on exactly what sort of flavour Death Star you want to go for, either one with a slightly lower damage output but extreme durability with the Arc Rifles, or just insane damage output on slightly more fragile platforms with the Plasma. Again, we can be stacking an enormous amount of buffs on these guys now, though the single best buff, in my opinion, from the new book is this Genitor Holy Order Warlord trait to give them a 5+ Feel No Pain type save. Cataphrons are 3 wound infantry and are really susceptible to things like flat damage 3 weapons. This one Warlord trait, which applies as an aura, is a flat 50% buff against the damage of the vast majority of enemy weapons. You can then combine that with all of the other buffs that we know and love. The Servitor Mana Pool from the Vigilus formation can allow you to get each Servitor unit a 5+ invul save for 1 command point per, and we all know just how annoying to shift 5+ invuls plus 5+ Feel No Pain can be from that enormous Iron Hands formation with all of the infantry. The Arc Rifle Cataphrons are really quite cheap, 30 points, so 10 points per wound, and pretty much nothing is going to be shifting those things efficiently with a 5+ invul and a 5+ Feel No Pain. On top of that, Tech Priest can also help repair them and fix them up if they get half damaged, and you can also use the Master of Biosplicing trait, again from the Servitor Mana Pool, to turn regular cheap 5-point servitors into mighty Cataphrons with heavy weapons should the Mana Pool start to get depleted. Then we can start adding damage buffs to the unit, and there's even more options that Cataphrons have available than even the shooting castle that we just talked about. Again, through this Servitor Manimal formation, you can be next to a Tech Priest Dominus, and for 1 command points they can get +1 to hit. Pretty reasonable when you could be buffing an insane amount of guns with huge units of these Cataphrons. We can use a Manipulus as one of the characters, again for the extra 6-inch range, which is highly relevant on 36-inch ranged guns. And we can combine those Magos and Logos traits before from the previous shooting castle, for exploding 6s to hit, and also 6s getting AP -1. Theoretically, if we really are allowed to run with all of these Holy Order Warlord traits, and we fancied forking out for them all at the start of the game, we could also potentially use the Artisan Warlord trait, which gives mortal wounds on wound rolls of 6s for arc rifles, provided they're targeting vehicles, which will just make them shred vehicles even more efficiently. Finally, for 2 command points, if you have some Castellan robots nearby as well, you can spend 2 CP for Elimination Volley, which again can add +1 to hit, so these guys can be hitting on 2s, and the Castellan robot gets more accuracy as well. These guys, in particular the Plasma variant, have some of the best damage output in the game already, and now combining that with insane durability and even more shooting buffs is going to make things get very silly very quickly indeed. That's before we've even considered things like the actual Forge Worlds that you can use for them. We can have them be Styges for -1 to hit, and they have a Canticle now that allows them to fall back and shoot should they need to. That's probably one of the biggest weaknesses of at least the Plasma variant of this Cataphron Death Star if they get locked up in combat, so having a guaranteed insurance policy against that is really quite helpful, to be honest, and makes Styges a big draw. Riser is well known for its Plasma Specialist stratagem, +1 to the hit. This one's +1 to wound rolls and +1 to the damage characteristic of Plasma weapons. It genuinely means that even though the Plasma Servitors are somewhat fragile, and admittedly much less now, then a volley of a 12 unit of Cataphron destroyers genuinely has the opportunity to take out large chunks of an army. If we just take some of these buffs, say we had a Riser Plasma Cataphron unit, We've got reroll 1s from a Tech Priest Dominus, +1 to hit from the Tech Priest Dominus stratagem, and +1 to hit for Elimination Volley for being next to Castellan robots, and then stack that with a Majos trait as well, which we could give to that Tech Priest Dominus, and finally use the Rise of Plasma stratagem. Then we're committing quite a lot of command points to one unit, 4 to be precise on that turn. However, it most certainly pays dividends. If we used it on a max unit of Plasma Cataphrons and they were taking aim at Lehman Russ tanks, we get an insane average of 51 hits. We'll be wounding on 3s thanks to the stratagem for 34 wounds. We're AP 3 for 28 failed saves, and we're flat 3 damage for a ridiculous 85 damage on Lehman Russ battle tanks in one round of shooting. If you're facing an enemy tank army in direct line of fire, these guys genuinely might only need to fire once. It's just absolutely insane damage output. Finally, we could just go straight back to Mars with the previous shooting castle that we talked about, get call and access to more reliable canticles, use the Mars unique canticle for strength 9 plasma or strength 7 arc rifles, and then if we feel like it, throw Wrath of Mars on top of the huge unit for a bunch of mortal wounds as well. With the right stack of buffs, these guys are insanely hard to remove and have absolutely ludicrous firepower. Moving on to some of the other tricks that we can use in the Admech Codex now. These are all just more minor things that you might want to include one of in your army just to be able to do a snazzy trick with them. I think we might see Fusiliers quite regularly going forward. They're pretty cheap at 110 points or 130 with the chaff launcher. Their bombs can kick out a reasonable amount of mortal wounds each turn, and they have the option of seismic bombs to slow the movement of a key enemy unit, which could genuinely help change a game. The chaff launcher can make them really problematic to remove, or you can keep the command uplink, as this gives them access to the option to turn off character auras if you're within 6 inches of the plane. This could be very disruptive, force your opponent to have to redeploy, or just force them to have to focus fire on the Fusilier to try and take it down double quick. The thing is, you might win even in death for the Fusilier, as you can use the stratagem to make it auto-explode and hand out D3 mortal wounds to every unit within 6 inches. With the Fusilier, I'd probably just throw it straight towards the enemy, maybe fly over an enemy unit and then try and be in the heart of the army, and when they gun it down, plan to use that explosion stratagem to give them one final bombing run of mortal wounds, which could be more than the plane might have ever done in life if you're right in the centre of their army. The next one, I think the Corpuscare Electro Priests could be really interesting in Dune Riders or Drills, just purely because of the high amount of shooting they get, and now for one command point you can make it all AP-2, make it genuinely anti-everything, rather than just anti-light infantry as it was before. A unit of 10 of these for only 120 points will cause an average of 30 hits if you can get them all in range via a transport. If you're firing it at, say, Primaris Aggressors, without the stratagem you'd only be doing something like 5 wounds to them, which still isn't terrible to be honest. But with the stratagem you can get an extra 5 wounds basically for one command point. Now you're doing 10 wounds in the course of one shooting phase, really not too bad at all. These things are basically just going to melt any infantry of any description now, even if they're pretty heavily armoured. Maybe a trio of these in Dune Riders could be quite an interesting choice. They're really cheap at only 193 points for each boat full of fanatics. I think Sterilizers could be an interesting option for a deep strike anti-infantry screen clearing threat as well. What I try and do with these guys is have them jump in, use their flamers to pulverize one enemy infantry unit, and make sure I was in charge range of another. Ideally, if I could, I'd try and coordinate them with a Manipulus already on the board to give them +1 inch to charges, give them an 8 inch charge, and think about command re-rolling a failed charge. I'd then not try too hard to get many of them in range to kill that enemy infantry unit, and then next turn when they try and fall back, use their excellent 2+ stratagem to keep that infantry unit in combat, so the enemy can't just gun them off the table. Then in their turn you hopefully kill the infantry unit with your talons, and even if you don't, you could just fall back and then flame whatever you like with those phosphor torches. If these guys do get into combat with some infantry that they can lock up, then they're going to make themselves a real nuisance for your opponent unless they have good dedicated countercharged units. Sky Stalkers can be a reasonable threat to anti-infantry, as well as vehicles with those grenade packs that they can do flybys with. But I think that's a small unit that could be included in the army even if you're not interested in those sort of things, just literally to ping one unit with a -1 to hit roll each turn, which they can do by firing one gun at them and using one command point. It can't be used on Titanic units, but other than that, just making your enemy's most vital units slightly worse at shooting each turn is really not a bad choice for including these fairly cheap little flyboys. Next, if you want a really good screen for your shooting castle, I think that Cerberus Raiders could be a way to go. I'm quite interested by the idea of using a large unit of 9 of these, which at least theoretically seem like they could pretty much perfectly screen your entire army from melee. Basically turn 1, have them move up, they get a scout move so can be in the midfield. Even if your opponent gets first turn, say if they wanted to deal with them in melee, even if they put a melee unit right up close to the Cerberus Raiders, then you can still use that 2 command point stratagem to take a full movement when they charge you. and as their movement is 12 inches, you can fall back out of charge range for the enemy unit, meaning that it's literally impossible to charge the things. I know this is a little bit of vacuum type rules. They might get either gunned down, or they might be able to get surrounded by enemy units on all sides, in which case it wouldn't happen. But if you are playing an army that's pretty much entirely ground-based close combat threats, then you could make them literally impossible to charge the whole bulk of your army if you stretch this unit out bases end to end in the midst of the midfield. They really could cover a lot of area, and then even in your turn, if you wanted to go for maximum trolling potential, you could just move them straight back to right next to those enemy units, so they block movement and they can't move any further, and then even if they charged again, then you could just pull the same trick over and over. In practice, I don't think this will be quite as easy to achieve as I've made out, but even if you manage to do it once in every couple of games, this will be a massive frustration to opponents' melee threats. Finally, I'd just like to mention the custom Forge worlds, which I think might be a bit more fun builds than actually the most competitive things ever. If you're looking to make some of the Admech vehicles more durable, maybe as part of a shooting castle, then they can get a 6+ feel no pain, and they can heal 1 wound each turn now. I think the main competitor for that is the Styges Forge world, which is just -1 to hit, and that's certainly a good reliable durability buff that will likely be better against armies with ballistic skill 4+ and things. Still though, if we're in 9th edition, and modifiers aren't stacky anymore, then this little combo could be good for Archaeopters, who will already have the -1 to hit due to being hard to hit, and the Sindovian Dragoons, who already have -1 to hit as well. Finally, I think it could be fun to try out some fun infantry combos as well with the custom Forge worlds. If you go for the rad saturated Forge world, then you get that very interesting buff where if you're shooting at infantry from greater than 12 inches away, you subtract 1 from the strength of the weapon being fired. I think this could be fun on things like Skitarii Vanguard, as things like bolters will only be wounding them on 4s now, and lasguns will be wounding them on 5s, which is quite funny. These could combine very well with the second part of the Forge World trait, which could either be a boost to their rad saturation, making it 3-inch range, so Vanguard units could literally just stand right next to the unit, make them -1 toughness, and then have the rest of the army focus them down. Now they're a lot easier to kill, and the Vanguard don't actually have to be in combat with them to activate the buff. The other one that I think is quite interesting is that they can make radium weapons -1, so all of their radium carbines with their excessive amount of shots could all get -1 AP now, which is just going to make them a very good anti-infantry weapon, rather than being just pretty much locked to light infantry, which is all they can really cope with when they're AP at 0. I don't think that these are necessarily the strongest things ever compared with some of the other really powerful combos in the book, but I think they could be really fun to have an experiment with, and maybe try an Admech army out with a different feel. In any case, I think it's hard to deny that it's a very good time to be a servant of the Omnissiah. I'll certainly be interested to see how all of these combos impact Admech lists going forwards. I honestly think with this level of firepower, we could easily be seeing Admech lists at top tournament tables in the future pretty soon. If there's any combos or important tricks that you think that I've missed, please let me know down in the comments below. I'm sure there's more goodness to be exploited out of this book, with some other interactions that I've not focused on in this vid. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. We'll have plenty more Admech content coming over the week, and we'll be looking at some of their units one by one. So either subscribe or check back later if you'd like to see that. If you've been enjoying the videos, I'd just like to mention my Element Games affiliate link, which is one of the ways that I help support the channel and keep it going making more videos. Basically, if you live in the UK, Element Games is a discount retailer with a 10 to 20% discount off Warhammer 40k products. If you were thinking about ordering in some models in the near future, I have a link in the description below. If you click that one before ordering from Element, then a small portion of the money goes to Auspex Tactics without costing you any more at checkout. So it can be a helpful way to support the channel if you were ordering in some models over the internet anyway. There's a similar Amazon link in the USA and Canada, so if you were making any Amazon purchases, whether that's Warhammer 40k or something completely different, if you click that link before making the order, then it costs you no more, and a little bit of the money goes to Auspex Tactics as well. Thank you to the people who have been using these links. It really does help justify spending all this time making videos about Warhammer 40k. In any case, a big thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.